We are kicking off Advanced Health once again after stopping for a few months. But as you know, this is something that we will continue doing. This is our, believe it or not, 21st edition. So we've been doing this since 2018. And the idea was always to put together people from the healthcare sector, talk about topics, challenging topics, interesting topics, finding solutions, proposing new ideas. And it's I'm very happy to see a lot of familiar faces and also new faces here in the room. Today, we will be talking about a very dear subject to my heart, something that I've been looking into for many, many years, something I've been doing a lot of work on, and also something that I've been having many discussions with government officials, private sector, and that is how do we increase biotech R&D here, not only in the UAE, but in the region. It's a very, very big topic. It's a very, very big question. There is no right answer to it because each and every country does it in its own way. And today we will be talking about how should the UAE pursue the road to innovation in biotechnology and medicine. Different countries, like I said, do it in different ways. And the question that I've always had on my mind is, how are we going to do it if there is no, similar entities like the NIH, pumping billions of dollars into R&D? How can we do it without having VC companies that are, again, pumping billions of dollars into R&D? And how can we do it if we have such a small population? So, although it looks impossible for this to be done, but I think the word impossible does not exist in the vocabulary of the UAE, and I think there is definitely ways around it. And I've learned something very recently as well, which has opened my mind and has given me a lot of hope. So we will be discussing that in greater detail. I have a distinguished list of speakers here with me, including industry represented by Pfizer, including academia, of course our friend Dr. Aaron, and also Dr. Hemad, which I don't see, yes, of course, from more on the provider side and the genetic side. So with that said, I'd like to invite our first speaker, Dr. Aaron, who is the Chief Medical Officer at Alliance Care Technologies and adjacent professor at Mohamed bin Rashid School of Medicine, and many other roles as well, which will take me half an hour to finish. So, Doctor, we'll start with you, please.
Today, I want to talk about, at a high level, some of the exciting developments in R&D. And most of mine will be somewhat reduced also to three-letter abbreviations. But this is a unique opportunity because there is a mix, and even while we were sitting there with the other speakers, we talked about potential collaborations. And it's in this type of environment where we can explore possibilities. When we start getting out of our usual office space, of our current projects, or what constitutes our formal titles, then that's when some of the added value takes place. And hopefully I'll address some of the key pieces that needs to happen for R&D to continue to flourish in Dubai and the UAE. But this is a special area, the DSP, under Dr. Marwan's leadership. I've been following the story for quite some time. I think everyone knows this graph, what it represents. I call it the BC and AC graph. And you know what the C is, right? C is that little circle. So we were on a very nice trajectory, and 2 years ago, I assume most of you have been here, were here 2 years ago, right? So you knew we were on more or less a trajectory in terms of development in the science space, and then we hit this little C here. And the little C we had been anticipating for at least 100 years because we were overdue for this pandemic. We knew it was coming, it was just a matter of time. And the question was, were we prepared? So I think the last big challenge was Ebola, but obviously before Corona, after Corona, everything looks different. And literally when Michelle and I, we were sitting down and talking about the ACT suite of products, and I was really impressed with the ecosystem that was being built in the science park, in our company. And we realized that the time to start laying the groundwork and the foundation for the next phase of growth was probably a year, 18 months ago. So we had what I call the BC, or around the COVID pivot, where basically everything was COVID. So in the hospital practices, if you weren't doing COVID, you didn't have to come to the hospital. Well, that's kind of an exaggeration. But if you weren't a COVID patient, you didn't want to come to the hospital. And most of the things were kind of pushed back, they were delayed because we were focused on it. At about year one, we thought we had gotten through COVID, and then we had a couple other spikes. And fortunately now, the biology of this virus is starting to normalize back. It's kind of like a reversion to the mean for the investors. This is how coronas behave. Coronaviruses won't go away. So hopefully we will always see mild coronaviruses coming back in a seasonal pattern, but they won't cause us disruption, cause us use of ICU beds and a lot of hospitalized patients. So how do we pivot back to the growth phase, especially when we're thinking about medical research of R&D in the post-corona period? So there's been at least one pivot focused on corona only, and now the pivot is what does it look like after corona? So this is kind of the ACT suite of products, and it's just to help you understand. I think this is a useful framing because it puts the key person in the middle. And when we talk about healthcare provision, so I do most of my practice at King's, but for a long time I was associated with an American brand in the city. And we always talked about the patient at the center. So historically, the patient at the center meant the hospital was at the center. But increasingly, patient at the center, especially in Corona, the patient is not always in the hospital. And ideally, you don't want the patient in the hospital. You only want the patient in the hospital as a last resort. So the patient tends to be at home, or it could be in a different setting, it could be an outpatient setting, but usually the patient is not at the hospital. But that's okay, because at the end of the day, if we focus on the patient in healthcare, that's the key piece, is to make the patient at the center of the care, empower the patient, and then the ecosystem is more or less built around that. And in the outer rim, in the white boxes, those are kind of the different pieces. And I'll go through some of these pieces because this tells you what some of the pain points are currently when healthcare people think about the ecosystem in hospital-based care, but also as we moved into the next generation of healthcare that's not hospital-based, but increasingly also it becomes value-based. I don't know if that's a term that's familiar to you. So a lot of the movement and the research also is in terms of outcome. How do we get the best outcome in terms of our cost structure? So one of the things that we've looked at is this whole idea of how do we take what we know about existing diseases, and this is one of our founders for one of the platform, Dr. Bill Bolenbrock. He practiced orthopedic surgery, but then he developed what is the next detection system to prevent the next pandemic. And this is primarily symptom-based. So there is a database that can be created, and this is very helpful for either large health systems, public health monitoring, but also emergency departments in which we want to pick up COVID before it happens. I don't know where you were in November, I think it was 2019. Yeah, that's one of the first cases. I remember seeing it on CNN, Wuhan, this funny virus. I actually texted one of the hospital physicians and said, are you tracking this story? Because I thought, you know what, if this is real, this is the next Spanish flu. And she said, I'll get on it. And by next year, January, I don't want to pick on the Informa people because they also give me exposure, but January, we usually have our Arab Health or Med Lab, and a big proportion of the attendees come from China. I had just returned from Taiwan visiting my mother for Chinese New Year. So by that time, they were monitoring flights from Wuhan to Taipei. We were asked to mask, and take temperature twice a day. This was January 2020. When I walked into Arab Health, nothing bad about Arab Health, because in a hospital, we were still having meetings of this size. Nobody was masking. I was the only one masking, because I came back from Taiwan, we were masking. And the next thing we knew, we declared the pandemic. Well, WHO finally got it right. Well, Bill has worked on a model. We're doing some initial pilot testing. We're correlating in a proof of concept, so a POC, that's the other three-letter acronym you should be familiar with, is POC. How do you do POC at a scale so that you don't risk all your capital on projects that aren't going to yield results? And I'll put in a plug for the ACT leadership, because we have capacity and people who know how to deliver projects at reasonable budgets. So we don't spend all your money chasing down rabbit holes. So that's very important, because that's one of the keys to meaningful research development, especially when you're not in a situation where you have billions and billions to pour into the ecosystem. So this is one of the key modules. The other one is a value-based module, and this basically takes practices and just stay with the red and the green quadrants. These are looking at surgeons and their practice patterns, their cost to the practice. So what it costs to the patients, and then also the outcomes. So this is a value-based type of system. So where you want to be, upper green quadrant, because that's superior performance at optimal cost. So that's where we want to be. And this is where payers are going to go. Okay, not right now in Dubai, because literally 2 or 3 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, I would sit in meetings with the C-suite, with the board, and say, you know, this is where we need to go. We need to figure out what is rational alignment of payer mechanisms with how we treat people. And they said, oh, no, you know, we still get paid for our procedures. But Abu Dhabi's already here. And part of it, I work in the lab for most of my practice, and I already see in the lab. Today, your CBC, or yesterday, when your CBC may be $20, tomorrow it's going to be $10, in a couple of years it's going to be $5, and in 10 years you may get free CBC. Someone's going to offer you free CBCs because the data is more important than actually what we charge you. So you've heard that, right? Data is the new oil. Well, I'm hoping someone's going to pick up on that and say the data is the new BTC and the new NFT. You know what BTCs are, right? So some of you have probably been trading in Bitcoins. So data is the new Bitcoin, data is the new non-fungible tokens. That's where hopefully we're going with this theme. So data is important. Another module that addresses a significant part of the health ecosystem, PT delivery. And this is a program called PT Genie. And it basically gives real-time feedback. There are sensors, and there's a feedback system where basically the patient can deliver their own PT in their own setting. And I first experienced this type of a module in training for cardiac resuscitation, so CPR training. How many people have done CPR? Okay, in the old days, you pushed on the mannequin, right? And then you had somebody stand next to you and say, push harder, or the mannequin doesn't beep or whatever. Well, nowadays, the AHA, the best practice module is you get computer feedback in real time. So if your mannequin is dying, the computer tells you, and you don't pass. This is what we do for PT, using PT Genie. So it's driven by a algorithm, and it tells you the number of reps, the degree of your effort, and it gives you real-time feedback. It also collects the data, and the provider also gets feedback on your session. So this is really the next gen of how physiotherapy is developed, and it has a significant value to provide as well. Another area in which we provide resources is in coding and reimbursement type of expertise. So AirCoder is one of the platforms. We're actually doing a small project, a proof of concept. We're looking at loin coding and the quality of loin coding, how to automate that. So if you're part of any revenue cycle management team in the hospital, these are data kind of experiments and data modules that you really want to have in order to optimize your development there. And then one of the last modules I want to talk about, and this is very important because this goes into personalized medicine. So I think most of you are familiar with the term. So I first encountered it, I mean, this is a whole different talk in and of itself. It's the individualization and recognizing that each individual, their disease state is determined by different either genetic factors or genetic signatures. So how many people have read the book, The Long Tail? It's the reason why Amazon succeeded and Apple Music platform succeeded. How many people listen to music on their LPs? You know those little discs that spin around? It's actually making a comeback. You know, I'd thrown away all these discs. Some of them we had melted them, made them into vases, you know, put flowers in them. And then now my kids are buying them, they're paying for them, and they're buying turntables. That's how we used to listen to songs. Okay, in the old days, everybody bought, you know, I don't know, the Beatles, this is gonna date me, Boston, Black Eyed Pea. But nowadays you listen, I'm trying to be cool. My kids tell me, you know, don't try so hard. So nowadays you don't typically listen on LPs, right? You know the song you want, you choose a song. Actually, Emirates has figured it out. And when I board my favorite airline, I sit at the seat, and actually they say there's a way you can program this. You sit at the seat, you choose your song, you develop your playlist. Your playlist looks nothing like anybody else's playlist. My playlist is going to be different from Michelle, different from my Informa friends, different from AGBL friends. They're all going to be different. Same with diseases. So how do you actually make money? Because in the old days, you're a Pfizer. You want to make a medicine, you want billions of people to buy your medicine. You create a song, your LP has to sell millions, right, to make money. But there's a way to make money if everyone is different and you're selling to n equals 1. So that's another phrase you need to be familiar with. Every patient is different, but you can still make money on that. But how do you develop the platform that addresses the n equals 1, where everybody is different? And that's the tail. The big hump is everyone who has diabetes, everyone who needs Lipitor, everyone who needs the Pfizer BioNTech, everyone who's, well, you can't give J&J now. So everybody who's in the big hump, that's fine. You still need the business model there, but you need the tail where everyone is different, but you can address every n equal 1 personalized medicine. And this is what we do for cancer, the n equals 1. Every cancer gene is known, and Dr. Hemad, I assume, is going to talk about some of his genetic data from his lab, and then you query the database and you come up with the best likely successful outcome for treatment. So this is where personalized medicine is going. There's a lot of experiment because every person basically is an n equals 1 experiment. And we're just starting to see papers on how those n equals 1 experiments get done. So one of the issues we brought up is you don't have big patient population. That's okay. We have a diverse patient population. That's important because when you look at the existing database of studies, and people are pointing this out, it's affected by lack of diversity. So what actually works in the published results in New England Journal may not actually work in Dubai. So how would you know and how can you vet that? So n equals 1 and diversity is important. So I also want to highlight some other people that reside in the DSP ecosystem. They didn't pay me to do this. Some of these are my friends. Other people, I hope they will be my friends. One of the first diagnostic manufacturing companies. When I walked in, the last time I got PCR'd at the airport, almost all the boxes came from DSP Astrogene. And Dr. Menden's lab is providing a lot of the resources for developing local production. That's an important part. It's kind of the hardware of what needs to happen. You have to pay me to take a picture of this. Digital pathology is one of my aspirations. Digital pathology, and then layer it on with AI. So there's a lot of different ways to access that as well. And that's, again, AI is completely different talk. So we have the hardware, we have the DSP, we have the software, a lot of the ACT platforms, we have digital platforms, we have other pieces. The 3 pieces that we need for success, the hardware, the buildings, the software platforms, the third one, you probably know, right? It's the people. And this probably is the critical piece. They're not easy to find. And actually, Sheikh Mohamed, MBZ, MBR, both of them, they recognize this. And that's why there's these changes in terms of visa requirements. Because we want this place to be the place where top talent comes. And literally, they can work from anywhere. You know, they can work remote, they can sign on Zoom or Teams, they can jet in, but you can access their gray matter, and they don't always have to be on site because they can work basically from anywhere. So how do we get the best talent? And one of the jobs, it's not an ad for the movie, is what I call the interpreter or the translator role. Those are people who can bridge the need and also understand the tech side. Okay, so when I talk to people, oh, AI is going to replace us. Well, not really, because there's a whole database and a whole literature of clinical materials out there that need to be translated into meaningful projects, meaningful POCs for these data companies to leverage and turn it into meaningful therapeutics. So that's one of the areas in which I believe one of the key capacities will reside. There will be a significant need for people who can bridge the language of tech and the language of clinical side and development. So I want to close with this story I told Dr. Nadine, right? From Pfizer. Earlier I was going to close with my own Pfizer story. This is my cousin. I used to play chess. I think he's about 6 to 8 years younger than I am. So when I was in high school, college, I played a lot of chess. Back then it was somewhat cool but nerdy. Now it's really cool because of the Queen's Gambit. So everyone's playing chess. So Enoch got so good, he beat me. And we always followed each other. He has a Twitter page. I don't know if he's going to keep it once Musk takes over, but he has a Twitter page. Okay, and he went to Princeton, studied math. From Princeton, he went to Stanford and got a degree about 30 years ago in an area that I thought, wow, this is really cool. I think it's the next best thing. But it's like, are there any jobs for this? But watch the space. It was in computational biology. He got a PhD in computational biology. This is 30 years ago. There were no jobs created for that. Today, he's the vice president of Pfizer in Boston. So the only thing that tops that is I actually invited his wife, and sometimes when I want to push it, I say she's my cousin, but technically she's not. So she actually surpassed him because she's the first Harvard Dean of Faculty. So we invited her to talk at MBRU. So hopefully we can bring both of them to Dubai one day, give a talk, or maybe have them stay longer. Housing's on me. So that's my cousin's story, Dr. Enoch. So he's to be found there. So in closing, it's an exciting time. We've survived COVID with the leadership of this country, with the readiness of the scientific and the healthcare community. But these type of projects, especially R&D, it takes time. My cousin entered the field 30 years ago, and pretty much he defined the field. There are other people that are defining it in London, in Abu Dhabi computational biology, where they're taking pathology and basically reducing images to numbers. So every pixel is a number. Every color is a number. So I should have majored in math instead. So it takes time to grow this enterprise, but this is the trajectory that we are on. And this is a country that will continue to invest. This is the best place to do it. This is the story of Sheikh Khalifa's legacy, and God rest his soul. So this was an investment made decades ago in Texas, in cancer. And today it's yielding incredible fruit. Patients' lives are changed. And here we have the same thing. In DSP, we have the hardware, we have the software, and we have the people, and inshallah we'll attract and we'll have a halo that attracts even more of the different pieces that needs to bring us forward in our R&D venture. So thank you very much for your attention.
Dr. Nadia, if I invite you to the podium, please, to give us a presentation. Dr. Nadia Tarcha is a medical director at Pfizer Gulf, and we'll be hearing her perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Marwan and the team for the invitation. It is a pleasure to be with all of you. So I will have a short presentation, and it's going to be a brief about Pfizer Gulf and a glimpse of our current and the upcoming pipeline at Pfizer. So Pfizer's purpose is to deliver a breakthrough that change patient lives. And this mission is at the center and core of all of our work and all of our operations. Because we have one simple goal, is to maximize the patient impact by delivering these breakthrough. And as mentioned, so we have as well the patient at the center. So we have changed over the years, and it is patient lives that matter. And also in the Gulf, because I'm representing the Gulf, we have a goal and a future to envision that the disease doesn't win, but science does. And having as well in the center of our work the healthcare equity. So we ensure that we have an equitable access and affordable access to all the patients that are in the region. We have been working in Pfizer Gulf for over 40 years, and we worked closely with the government, healthcare professional, healthcare communities to impact the lives of millions of people that are living again here. Pfizer Dubai was inaugurated the office in 2011, and it is currently the home for the headquarters of Africa Middle East. And out of Pfizer Dubai, we serve 5 countries in the Gulf, from Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Bahrain, and definitely United Arab Emirates. And we have over 200 colleagues that support this operational work. In 2010, we opened the first local distribution hub, which is located in Jabal Ali Free Zone. And this is very important because it provides a faster and quicker access to the medicine, where we have over 750 employees and around 100 that are solely dedicated to Pfizer operational work. More coming to the future, and in 2022 alone, we are aiming to have more than 32 launches across the 6 different therapeutic areas that we have. And again, having the healthcare equity at the center of our work, we are proud that we have 4 patient assistance programs that are currently running, with the hope to serve around 1,200 patients alone in 2022. Coming mainly to the science, and this is mainly why we are here today. One of our bold moves in Pfizer is to deliver a first-in-class science and to maintain the focus on the value of our science. And why this is essential? Because we need to maintain our commitment to the healthcare community, and we need to maintain our commitment to serve our patients. So despite the pandemic and the focus on vaccine globally, in the Gulf, we were able to maintain our commitment to the other therapeutic areas. Because we have a broad portfolio from oncology, rare disease, internal medicine, hospital, inflammation, and immunology. And in the Gulf, we invest on each one of these 6 therapeutic areas, and we bring innovation from each one of these 6 different therapeutic areas. So what we did in the Gulf in 2021 with the medical team, we were able to generate data for 30 publications. We initiated 12 non-interventional studies. Some were closed, some are still in the continuing process. We have 2 running phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials, and we have 4 or more collaboration with the healthcare communities. All of these, they can go from a local disease burden to diagnostic data to treatment outcome. But again, they are representing local unmet need within the patient disease journey. And also some of these are molecules that are still in the pipeline. So once the product is going to be approved by the FDA, we are ready to deliver it to the patient because we have already shaped the environment. If we come to 2022, we are definitely building on this, and we are aiming to bring more phase 1, phase 2 clinical trials to the region, because this is one of our main purpose, is to have more of these clinical trials within UAE and beyond in the Gulf, and to develop long-term partnership from the healthcare professional, the medical society, and what is more important, and we have been focusing on these in the last 2 years, are the patient organization. Because these patient organizations, they represent the patient voice, and that's why we initiated the work with Dr. Marwan Rare Disease Society this year. So we are trying to explore more of these patient society in the region, though their number is quite limited, but we are trying to invest and to listen more to the patient voice. Again, so because we want to reach to the patient and to maximize the support that we have for the patient. Last is the R&D within Pfizer. So again, these are the 6 different therapeutic areas that we have. And the Pfizer pipeline is really, again, to bring new innovations. And it goes, so it is at the heart of fulfilling a new innovation, new treatment pathways that are going to serve the patient. And this is our These are what is coming as of May 3rd, 2022. So this is a really new snapshot. We have 30 molecules that are in phase 1, 31 that are in phase 2, 29 that are in phase 3, and we have 6 molecules that are in the registration process, which give us to a 96 total new molecules. These, again, they go all over the 6 therapeutic areas, and we are hoping that each one of these molecules will have a positive outcome in the clinical trial so we can serve it to the patients. And that's it from my side. Thank you.
Excellent, very good, very insightful, and I'll definitely pick on a few of the things that you mentioned. Dr. Hemad from Dubai Health Authority is our last speaker. Dr. Hemad is a molecular geneticist and also a genomic consultant and a researcher at Dubai Health Authority. The floor is yours.
When I heard about this presentation and this session, I thought I would start basically to talk about what I know. And what I know is the science of genomics. So I'm going to talk about genomics mainly. Genomics is basically one of the multi-layers that is going to transform medicine and make medicine more personalized, as we heard of it. The only way that I believe pharmaceuticals such as Pfizer is able to find those biomolecules to put them through clinical trials is to do studies at different layers. Those layers could be metabolomics, genomics, transcriptomics, and proteomics. And I'm pretty sure they are doing that. They will do it in different layers, and then by comparing them in a cohort of the population, then they might find some fingerprints, they might find some signatures that would then hopefully lead to their sort of phase 1 and phase 2 trials. So the question here is, can we do research on all of that front? And I think the future of medicine is for somebody who is able to perform researches at different levels. And there are some laboratories in the UAE that have started to do that. I believe G42 has an omics lab, and they're doing a fantastic work there. So from my perspective, I will only focus on genomics. Genomics is defined as a collection of all your genes in your body. And it is the genes that basically drive cell function. So if we can understand each gene and its functions, we will then, in turn, might be able to understand how diseases are progressing, they come about, and then how to manage them. And to be honest, it impacts us, the human, throughout our life. Whenever our parents want to make a decision about having a child, in the not very distant future, they can go to a lab, they can have their genes sequenced, and then they can get a carrier screening report, for example, that will tell them what are the risks of having a child in case both of them carry the same type of mutations or defects in their genes, and then how to prevent them. When a child is in a sort of prenatal stage or it's a newborn, we have a lot of newborn screening. Nowadays in the UK, there is a program to do a whole genome sequencing of all the newborns that will come through, whether they have illnesses or not. And the idea behind that is that you are able to store these sequencing data, as Dr. Han says, and those data in the future can inform any prediction for any diseases that a child that might come through or that might have, hopefully using some AI function as well. And to be honest, infectious diseases, we've just going through or are almost at the end of one of them. The only way coronavirus vaccine was able to be made in such a short period of time was because they were able to sequence the genome of the virus. And they did that within a day or two. So really, genomics is impacting all the stages of our lives. It's becoming more affordable and more accessible to people to do it. In the past, it was only focused in highly specialized research laboratories in the US, but now we can see many laboratories across the world, they would have some type of genome research and diagnostics lab. And this is a very very nice graph that describes the drop in cost of doing a whole genome sequencing. Not long ago, it was about 100 million to do one person sequencing, and that was because it was done at the research level. And nowadays, you can do it in about $300-400 US, $600 US. And I believe in a not very long distance future, we will have a whole genome sequencing done at roughly $20 US or less. So once we get to that stage, then the question comes what to do with all those data, because those are enormous amount of data that we'll be sequencing. And I think that is where the research that can come in from now to try to basically come up with solutions, tools, softwares, and possibly practice guidelines that would then be able to have a better health and better sort of understanding of ourselves and our body in the future. And this can be done in two scales. One is that we will need to do clinical research, which normally is done in a very sort of small cohort of people, 100, 1,000, maybe 10,000, depending on the collection of the sample. That would then give you a number of biomolecules that becomes your markers. Once you validate that, and once you find out, yes, this mutation is a good fingerprint to identify a certain diseases, then that can be then fed into a diagnostic lab for routine clinical care. And this is a sort of never-ending loop. And the only way to do that is to have a correct hypothesis and correct research question asked at the beginning, and have the infrastructure to do it as well. Every human being has roughly about 3 trillion cells, divided into sort of 300 cell types. And each one of those cells contain a nucleus that contains your DNA. And that DNA is roughly about 6 billion base pairs in a diploid setting. Out of that 6 billion base pairs, only less than 2% of it codes for proteins, basically has a function that we know of. And that is about 20,000 genes. So in our diagnostic lab, we can easily sequence the entire coding genes. But still, we have a problem because 98% of the genome is unknown. We don't know the exact functions of it, but I'm pretty sure in the next decade or so, we'll come to know exactly what the functions are. And I don't believe that those are junk DNA, because when I was at school, they told us, yeah, 98% is junk DNA, but I don't believe in evolution and in nature that will produce junk materials, because I think nature really looks at energy conservation and looks at the simplest and most suitable biomolecular process. So from the 20,000 genes, and this is the point I want to make from this slide, we only know the functions of 5,500 roughly or thereabout. So there's a lot of genes in our body that we can sequence, but we don't know its impact on health. So there's a huge amount of research that can be done, and it takes time. It takes time. It takes money, and you need to collaborate with other people across the globe in order to do that. So one of the areas that we were we looked at doing the research on was on rare diseases and cancer. Why rare diseases? Because rare diseases is your tail that Dr. Han was talking about. It's very rare. It happens in sort of less than 1 in 2,000 population. But that can inform us a lot about a possible gene that may be mutated that would then lead to a possible disorder with the specific phenotypes. And that can really be a very useful research starting point. And most international genome projects always start with rare diseases and cancer. But these are not the only problems that we face. We have cardiovascular disease that impacts a lot more people, and that's your hump. We also need to look at that, and we also need to try to identify ways of basically reducing the risk factors of that. Yes, lifestyle is part of that, but I truly believe that genetics can also play to inform individual risk, and there are some research that can be done on that front. So the question is how a genomics program can benefit Dubai or the UAE. I think by having a very healthy genome research program that would then close the loop between the healthcare provider and the bench scientist, eventually you will start to save healthcare savings. And we have done some calculations on that. A very simple example that I always give is breast cancer patients. Some of them, they may respond to the HER2 or the tamoxifen drug, and some of them may not. And the reason behind that is that they might have the ER mutation or the ER receptor amplified and not. And by doing a very simple test before administering a drug, you can basically filter out patients in advance whether they will be able to respond. And that is just a very basic and a very simplified example. But imagine if you can start sequencing people, their tumors, their bodies, before you start to giving them medication, you can increase the efficacy and the efficiency of the drugs that is administered, and you can reduce the wastage in that front. And there are some calculations that are done in the world. But I also believe by moving towards precision medicine, you are able to also further personalize the care that you're giving to your patients. And I really think that's the future that will be going, because one pill does not impact everybody. It impacts individuals differently, and now we're understanding more how that impact comes about. But also, I think a healthy and robust genome program can really stimulate the academic research and development that is needed, and also and help companies like Pfizer's to get access to those rich data that are really sorting after, to help them to then translate some of those findings maybe into therapeutics. And that's it. So that's my slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Mohamed, I know you just gave a presentation, but I have a burning question for you. Now, all the work that people like yourself are doing is great, and we're learning more and more. Genetic information is becoming more and more available, is becoming more affordable. How would a clinician who has no idea about how to read genetics be able to take advantage of that information? I mean, it's good to have it stored, to have it on a dashboard that the doctor can see, but how can that information be used to make better decisions to the patient?
This has to be done through education. I think there are guidelines that has to be followed, and the guidelines that are written for physicians to try to interpret some of this data. Some of this can be done through hiring of genetic counselors who would be able to bridge the gap between the lab and the physician by trying to interpret some of these findings. But I really do believe that in the future, a medical doctor should not just only focus on his specialty, but also understand the biology behind and the mechanism behind at molecular level as well. And I think this has to be done early on at education level, so that in 10, 15 years' time, all physicians, whether they're a family physician or highly specialized surgeons, they would know what genes are, they would know what genes impacts their disease that they're looking at. And I think just through the education, that's the best way.
Right. So similar to how we are now incorporating medical coding into the practice of doctors, we need to also do something similar when it comes to genetics.
Yeah, that doctor's job will be a lot more complex in the future.
Yes, absolutely. Dr. Nadine, from an industry perspective, I think it's common globally that industry is usually picked on where do they do the research, how do they do the research, and again, like I mentioned in my opening, I have gone into a lot of details when it comes to the investment into R&D and how that is done and what governments do, etc. So Pfizer does, and this is again generally speaking, concentrate the research in specific locations, where there is talent, etc. So how can we bridge that gap here in our region? You know, I think one of the publications I read says that globally our region gets 1% of the R&D budget of the industry. So how can we increase that number?
When Pfizer or other pharma, but I'll speak on behalf of Pfizer, they plan to do a clinical trial. They do take several factors into consideration. It could be from the disease burden, the prevalence of the disease, because the higher the prevalence, the faster the clinical trial will go, because in some situation we're going against time. So we cannot have a lot of time to enroll the patient within the clinical trial. Two, it could be the size of the country, the readiness, the infrastructure readiness within the country. So can they do phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials? These are some of the main factors. And to answer more in detail the question, so this is what we are trying to do mainly for the UAE, and this is one of the projects that we initiated with the Department of Health in Abu Dhabi. So we want to boost the clinical trial capabilities. So it's boosting the clinical trial capabilities to make sure that we are representing UAE to the global team when they come to select a site for the clinical trials. So we partnered with the Abu Dhabi health government, and the objective is to train 150 clinical researchers within the next coming 2 years. These clinical researchers will be subdivided, let's say, into cohorts based on their clinical trial expertise. And they will be trained by Pfizer clinical trial team from Belgium, by academia. So we are partnering with Harvard MRCT as well, and with specialized partners. So we're hoping if we boost these clinical trial capabilities, at least we have the infrastructure that is ready. The second is, as you have seen through the non-interventional studies and the local data that we generate, we focus on the disease burden. So we try to map as much early as possible the main focus and disease burden that our the patients are suffering on from the region. So we are trying to address some of these points to make sure that we attract more clinical trials in the region.
Dr. Aaron, with the transformation that is happening in digital health, is that anyway going to help to do more research? Because, you know, clinical trials 10 years ago or 20 years ago was always about the size of the population, where can you do it easier in a bigger way. So how is digital transformation helping clinical trials?
It's a great question.
Or is it even helping?
It definitely will help. So Dr. Hemad has pointed out the genetic data and the storage of genetic data and images. The storage requirements are really huge. I don't keep up with the storage numbers. So, you know, this phone, for example, I hold today, and it's representative of Moore's Law, which is the reason why the genetic testing cost reduces every couple of years. Illumina is the platform, you know, that does most of our sequencing. And all that kind of data, what I have on my phone today, used to take the size of probably this room for the IBM server. So that's the reason why we have phones that are more powerful. That's why we have sequencers that are more powerful and less expensive. But that means we're generating lots and lots of data. So digitization will improve our ability to do research. For example, Dr. Hemad has one of the largest genomic databases. It's right for research. If you have certain targets, many of the genes, for example, you don't know what the significance of the gene is. So we have this 3-letter acronym. It's called VUS, right? It's variant of undetermined significance. So we get on these reports. We can detect your gene. We have no idea what it means. And oftentimes they don't have a matching medicine on the market. The best case scenario is you have a gene that you have a matching target and a drug, but it's not approved for your condition. Usually we can get clearance for that. So these are the types of things we can do because so much data is now captured. It's digitized. Really the next phase of digitization is, the big piece is images and also natural language. We have a lot of information that's currently in transcribed text. So the story I usually tell is when I started my pathology practice, I entered and we used to dictate our reports. And we have a secretary type them. Today, I click on the computer, they're discrete data points. Or better yet, they're Google typed for you, so it's captured in a digital fashion. it's much easier to analyze that. It's much more discrete data. So it's ripe for the right people connecting the dots. You have the digital data, you have the information, a lot of that information. Some of that is public. Some of that is stored, so companies like 23andMe, it's one of the early examples. They've collected all that information. A lot of these genes are not known, but they will be known in the next 10, 20, 15 years. They will be matched to actionable targets and drugs that specifically address that. And it doesn't take a large population to do that kind of research. If you have the database and you have the right minds who kind of think about this, connecting the dots. And I think that's one of the parts about research is that there are some discoveries that are made because you entered the field thinking how to make the discovery. But really some of the biggest discoveries, and when you talk to Nobel Prize winners, they enter fields where there was nobody doing it because it wasn't the hot area. So 30 years ago, I was doing PhD work in Texas. Next door was a man called Jim Allison. We used to read his papers. He was studying T cells. And he was talking about immune regulatory signaling on T cells. But it took about 20, 30 years for it to come to fruition. Today, it is the cornerstone. Everybody knows about PD-L1. He has a Nobel Prize, but it takes years for these kind of ideas. And usually these are ideas that nobody else wants to pursue. Or it happens on what we call the 10%, you can do whatever you want time. So creative people also need the freedom to basically have projects that usually 2 levels up, they cannot know about it. Because they're looking at ROIs, it's like, what's he doing with, why can't we get 10% more productivity out of this guy? Well, that 10%, he may be working on a project that's gonna be basically your gold nugget project that's gonna really be the home run.
Right.
But having said that, when you think about a whole suite of portfolio, that's a different subject. But there's a lot of opportunities to exploit digital.
Excellent. Now, if we look at the ecosystem of R&D and clinical trials and fostering innovation, you have to look at several aspects. Talent is one of them, talent availability and talent attraction. Then we have government incentives and government programs. Thirdly, we also have the prevalence of a disease, how much that particular disease is prevalent in that particular geography. So, and also the availability of academic institutes, which churns out talent. So if we look at all of these aspects, and I might have missed a few, where do we stand today as UAE, and how can we take that next step? We'll start with you.
MBRU students tend to have, and hopefully this will be increasingly seen in medical students in the region. They take statistics and research methods in year 1. Then they are assigned basically research projects that they carry on through their time in the university, which is about 5 to 6 years. And every time we have a student, they come and do a rotation at King's, we think about how do we plug them into a research project. So if you have lab space and you need students, please talk to me later, because we have people who we can put to work, we can put them on small projects. They're not going to be on these home run projects, the 10% time of your master PhD projects. They're ones that have to generate in some kind of result. Because, I'll be honest with you, 30 years ago when I was in grad school, the only reason you stay in grad school is because promise of a career. Okay, and 30 years ago, research actually hit a wall. Because as I was entering grad school, starting to come out, nobody wanted to do a PhD because NIH started to cut funds. So the enterprise had to adjust. Now, after COVID, it's different. Everything's changed. It's all about health, it's all about education. Health is going to drive the next phase of growth. So everybody thinks healthcare has a future. And where there was no funding, now there's funding because people see the return.
We do have talents in the UAE. For example, for my lab, I have about 30 staff. 60% of them are Emirati nationals. And about 30% are below the age of 25. And these are talented individuals who come across universities. So these individuals, they just need opportunity and they need the right training because I believe the motivation is there. And they're not coming to science because of money, because there is not much money in science, I can tell you. If they want to make money, you go to business, I know. But I think they love science and they love healthcare and they love their own people and they come to science. So the question is that we need to empower these people. We need to enable them to have more trainings. And the only way we can do that, one of the problems I face with the lab is that we are sitting in a silo. And for us to try to integrate with MBRU or with Khalifa University or with the New York University Computational Biology Center, I have to go through a number of loops and hoops because we are government funded. So I can't just approach somebody and say, would you like to look at my data? And so we have to get the ethical forms done, consent done, approval. So that really drags and that really demotivates the people. So I think if you want a vigorous clinical research done, firstly, use your own talent which you have. Yes, they have to be guided by some leaders, that's fine. And secondly, provide them with opportunity. 10% of the time at work maybe can be spent on doing research or going to outside of the lab, into a different lab, into different hospitals to try to figure out what's going on. That's, I think, is very important to make it sort of self-sufficient and successful. Yeah.
So I'll add that the situation have tremendously evolved from pre-COVID to post-COVID, because what the UAE have done during the COVID pandemic, so they were leading some of the trials that were done in the country. So definitely there is a lot of capability, there are a lot of talents, but still there is more that can be done. And for example, the education, the training, and the partnership that we have between the pharma and the academia will definitely help to improve and to make more the UAE on the map when it comes to the clinical trials.
I just want to thank everyone for attending Advanced Health, and I look forward to seeing you in the near future, and definitely thank you for the panelists and your time. Thank you.